Good afternoon and welcome to the Environmental Law Institute. You have joined us for an introduction to careers in environmental law and policy. My name is Caitlin McCarthy and I'm the director of the Associates Program here at ELI. We're delighted to welcome everyone here today to the very first seminar kicking off ELI's annual summer school series. And I encourage you to join us here at ELI every Tuesday this month and next, not 4th of July Tuesday, but all the others. For any more information on the rest of our summer school series, you may find that on our website at eli.org. Thank you for joining us. At the end of today's panel, we will have time for a question and answer session, and we encourage you to ask questions at that time. If you are joining us in the room, we will have a microphone to carry around. That will only amplify minimally. It's mostly so our folks on the web can hear you as well. If you are joining us through GoToWebinar, please submit your questions through GoTo's question box, and please do not wait until the end to send your questions as soon as you think of them. I would like to thank our outstanding panelists for joining us today to lend their leadership to summer school. While I will introduce them briefly momentarily, the full speaker bios are posted on our website, eli.org, and I would encourage you to check out their expertise and experience in more detail there. As we begin, I would like to briefly introduce our panelists. Toby is a partner at Kirkland & Ellis, where he is in the Environmental Transactions Practice Group. His practice includes conducting and coordinating environmental due diligence for clients, counseling clients on environmental liabilities and risk allocation strategies, and managing the post-closing resolution of environmental issues. Toby, we're glad to have you back at summer school.
Thank you.
Shannon is Vice President at Schaick Associates. Her current focus includes providing turnkey government affairs services to 2 national trade associations, advocacy on behalf of global food companies, representation of major U.S. manufacturers in trade matters, representation of a healthcare startup, and appropriations. Shannon, thank you for joining us. Kathleen is the Senior Manager of Environmental Policy and Wholesale Market Development at Exelon. She focuses on energy, electricity, climate, and environmental policy as a specialist with vast experience in regulatory and legislative strategy development and implementation. Kathleen, we're glad to have you here. Rachel is an attorney advisor in the Office of General Counsel at NOAA. Prior to working as attorney advisor, she was a student attorney at the Georgetown Law Institute for Public Representation, Environment Section, and a law clerk with the Environment and Natural Resource Division at the Department of Justice. Welcome, Rachel. Kendra is the Chief of Staff for Congressman Butterfield in the House of Representatives. With an extensive educational and professional background, we have also been delighted to have Kendra previously lend her expertise to ELI's annual Eastern Boot Camp and help plan a public program on environmental justice. Thanks for being such a great part of ELI, Kendra. So as you can see, we have really fantastic panelists with a wonderful variety of backgrounds, experiences, and expertise. Thank you all for kicking off the 2019 Summer School Series. With that, I would like to warmly turn things over to Toby to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin, for having me on this panel. I was telling Caitlin a little bit earlier that I can't really remember for how long, but it's been a personal goal of mine to be on this panel, so I'm feeling very validated today. But I think primarily to help raise awareness of this particular career that I stumbled upon, a transactions-focused environmental practice, which I don't think a lot of people really think about when they think about going to law school and when they think about pursuing a career in environmental law. And then I'll also probably just talk a little bit about my career path, because I guess my other goal is to sort of, to the extent that you can, learn from how I sort of tried a bunch of different things and eventually found the career that I found to be the best fit for me, hopefully to help, if you can not repeat some of the mistakes that I made, that'll be good too. So the job is, we have a group at Kirkland & Ellis. It's the Environmental Transactions Practice Group, and it is a group of about 21 attorneys now in 4 different offices: DC, San Francisco, Houston, and Dallas. And we are a group of environmental lawyers who primarily provide environmental support for transactions from our various transactions-based practices. So private equity, mergers and acquisitions, that's probably the biggest portion of what certainly I do and probably the group. We also do M&A work for public companies. We provide support to our real estate group for their real estate transactions. We, to a lesser extent, well, we have other people who have different specializations, but we have people who support our bankruptcy and restructuring practice. And then when Kirkland added its oil and gas practice down in Texas several years ago, our group expanded to provide support to that. And actually with Kirkland's growth, we find ourselves being stretched in a lot of different directions. We have a project finance group that has come on board. So we're providing environmental support in that area as well. So, you know, as narrow as this career of environmental transactions might seem, there's a huge variety of work within that space. And, you know, I would say the nuts and bolts of what we do is most of our clients are buying and selling businesses in the same way that an individual might buy and then later flip a house. You buy something, you look to improve its value, and then you look to sell it in a certain number of years for a profit. And so they are the experts at doing that, but they're not necessarily experts in environmental risks and liabilities. So that's where we come in. That's our job, is to sort of diligence the target business or the target properties, evaluate its environmental risk profile, identify the environmental risks and liabilities associated with their business, their facilities, oftentimes their histories. Sometimes you have targets that do something now, but they did something very different back in the past, and something with a much higher level of environmental risk associated with it. And then, so we advise our clients on what these environmental risks and liabilities are. We give them advice on how to manage that, whether that's getting an indemnity from the seller, or if it's getting environmental insurance. I would say, you know, a lot of the key value that we bring to the table is, one, being that bridge between the scientists or the consultants and these business folks who are, you know, doing transactions. Because in any deal that has, let's say, a heavy environmental component like manufacturing or hazardous waste management, you are undoubtedly going to be retaining an environmental consultant to do a more technical review of the operations and the facilities. But they are scientists, and they have a certain lens, and they do a lot of different work, not all of which is necessarily related to transactions. But there are consultants who specialize in coming into this transactional space and doing like a transaction level review of the environmental risks and liabilities. So not necessarily the deep dive that you'd have if they were doing like a 2-week comprehensive multimedia audit of a company and their compliance. But it's sort of more high level and big picture focused. And so they present their findings, but it's our primary job to take those findings and to translate it and present it for a variety of audiences. So there's your client, who are business folks, and they have sort of like a very business focus. They're not interested in the science. They won't thank you for explaining the science. They just want to know what it means and how do they make their decisions and how do they protect their interests. Then you have, oftentimes you have a lender. So in the transaction, your client is borrowing money from a lender in order to finance the purchase. So you are then speaking with the lender, and whereas when you're talking to your client and you're trying to make sure that they understand the risks associated with the business that they're acquiring, when you go to the lender, the focus shifts and you are sort of more getting them, bringing them up to speed on the diligence that you've done on the target, and getting them comfortable that you've sufficiently diligenced it and that there's nothing big out there that's going to potentially cause the target business to go bankrupt and for them to default on their loan. We're dealing with a lot of insurance these days, and not the traditional environmental pollution legal liability insurance. The really hot thing these days is called representations and warranties insurance. So whenever a seller is selling a business, they'll make a variety of environmental representations and warranties. The target business is in compliance with all environmental laws and regulations. They haven't received notice of any environmental violations or liabilities. They haven't released or exposed anyone to any hazardous substances in a manner that has given rise to liability. So rep and warranty insurance is very different, and I guess this has been I'll make a long story short. Rep and warranty insurance used to just exclude environmental matters. They just wouldn't cover it. But that's shifted significantly in the last 5 or so years. So that's something that we get involved in, and again, the value that we bring just through the sheer amount of experience that we have is we develop that sense of what's market. That's what you'll hear a lot of clients ask. Well, we don't need to understand it. We just need to know that what we're getting is market for what everyone else is getting. So that's what we do in a nutshell. I'll say a little bit just sort of about my path and how I started working in this area. Because I've been at Kirkland, DC since 2004 doing this work, but I actually started off at Kirkland's Chicago office out of law school in 1996 as a patent litigator. And, after a couple of years, I realized that because I wasn't crazy about research or writing or arguing, that perhaps litigation wasn't the best fit for me. So I then moved to Wilson Sonsini in California, and I joined their biotech licensing group. And I worked there for a few years. And again, super interesting work, very cutting edge, working with great people. But I just really didn't like the biotech aspect. And I think the trap that I fell into coming out of law school is that I pursued the career path that I thought I should pursue as opposed to the one that most interested me. I went with the one that was like the highest profile, the most perceived upside, which was patent litigation, which is probably still patent litigation. But working in a private practice, it can be stressful, it can be time intensive, and I couldn't afford to not be really interested in the work that I was doing. Yes, I could force myself to do that, but why deal with that cognitive dissonance? So I ended up moving to DC in 2001 and eventually joining Chadbourne and Park, a general technology transactions-based practice group. Again, still not the greatest fit. I guess I should explain. My background is in science. I had a biology bachelor's and I did a master's in environmental engineering, which is why I thought I could and should do the IP work. And I guess fortunately for me, this is a bit happenstance, but the group that I had joined was slow. The managing partner of that DC office was an environmental lawyer, and he put me on my first transaction, a sale of 36 power plants, doing the environmental sell-side diligence. And that's how I discovered that I enjoyed the transactional work, and I enjoyed returning to my environmental roots. And one of the bidders in that auction process was represented by Kirkland, my old firm. So that's how I discovered. It's amazing. I worked in the Chicago office for 2 years and didn't even realize they had this environmental transactional practice here in the DC office. Although in fairness, I'm not sure I would have known then that that's what I wanted to do. I had to just sort of figure that out on my own. So I came back and I was a little bit, nervous because, again, for the same reasons that I sort of mentioned before, that it seemed very niche and very specialized. And I was thinking, I probably don't have many more moves left. I need to really think that I'm going to enjoy it. But I had enough of a basis to think that this was a much better fit for me. And that's definitely panned out. I really do enjoy what I do. I'll say a few more things about sort of why I like the job and why, as compared to the other jobs that I had, but that will be like a illustration of the things to consider. There are, ultimately, it's going to come down to fit and what do you like? Because I have, you know, like my college law school roommate was born to litigate. He just loves it. You know, he goes to sleep thinking about how he's going to get the other side and wakes up in the morning thinking the same exact thing. And that's why that's a great job for him. I didn't enjoy it. You know, I always had a feeling that even my client, when I was a litigator, didn't particularly like me because I was a constant reminder that they were being sued for something. Working on transactions, it's a lot more of a win-win concept. You know, both the buyer and seller have to want to do the deal, or the deal's not going to happen. They both have to feel like they're winning. So really, you know, what I really enjoy, also because I can't compartmentalize when I argue, like I get upset and it just ruins my day. So, you know, what I really enjoy is that my job is to facilitate a transaction. And when there is a big environmental issue and it's in the early stages and no one knows how much it's going to cost, that's really tricky. Those are the types of issues that will really impede a deal if you can't figure out how you're going to allocate that risk between the buyer and the seller in a way that both sides find to be acceptable. So I enjoy that. I also, these are going to be a little bit more sort of like mundane considerations, but I enjoy the variety and also kind of like the much quicker turnover. So when I was on a lawsuit and as a litigator, it was a great, super interesting case, but it lasted the entire time that I was at Kirkland & Ellis Chicago. I mean, they go on for years. Whereas transactions, you work on, those occur on a timeline of like weeks or at most months. So there's just a lot of turnover, a lot of variety. You see a lot of different industries. I mean, I work on deals from software companies to hazardous waste management companies and everything in between, and in all different kinds of jurisdictions. So it requires an ability to multitask and to juggle. So that's, some people might like that, some people might not like that, but that's what I find super interesting. And then the other plug I'll make is that it doesn't really require any travel, because when I started working on this in 2004, data rooms used to be physical data rooms where everyone, all the reports and everything were gathered, and you had to go out and sit in a room with other people. All of that went online. So all the documents are reviewed online now. All the negotiations occurred online. So probably the number of business trips that I've had to take because of work, because of a deal, in the 15 years that I've been doing is less than 10. So I sort of enjoy not having to travel, or if I'm going to travel, I'd like to do it for a reason other than work. So anyway, thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Toby.
Am I next? Yeah. I'm Shannon Campagna. I'm a lobbyist at Van Schaick Associates, and thank you, Caitlin, for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here, and I looked at the background of my fellow panelists, and I'm not sure, my name must be similar to some other really accomplished lawyers somewhere, but I'm really happy to be here. I'm the non-lawyer. I think I'm the only non-lawyer on the panel. You're not a lawyer? Okay. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But so I'll be focusing more on the sort of policy side. And I think first I'll sort of give you the trajectory of my career, such as it is. I went to the University of Alabama, and I graduated in 1990 and decided I wanted to move to Washington. I really had not really a clear idea of what I wanted to do or how I wanted to do that. So I commend you all for being so proactive and being here to kind of look at what you're going to do in your careers. So I moved up here and just sort of, you know, felt like, okay, Washington, D.C., I've arrived. And I had an internship on Capitol Hill. I needed a couple more hours to graduate. So I did an internship for credit with a member of Congress from Alabama. And then I had talked my way into and it was talking because there was no email, so I was on the phone with this woman. I had talked my way into an internship at the Republican National Committee. There is a very sort of prestigious internship program there called the Eisenhower Internship at the Republican National Committee, which is for children of donors primarily and other sort of high-level Republicans. I was not one of those. I was in the back. Lee Atwater was the chair of the RNC at the time, and we used to have these big auto pen, and Kendra may remember the auto pens where to sign. What's that? You still have one?
Not my office.
Okay, really? So there were these big things that would sign a member of Congress or other sort of influential person's name on pictures. So that was my job. So I did that, and that was a great experience. And then I was able to get a job on Capitol Hill for a member of Congress from Missouri. I'm from Alabama. As a Republican at the time, there were only 2 Republicans in the Alabama delegation in 1990, so times have changed. So I had interned for one. My roommate worked for the other member, so I got a job with a member from Missouri and ended up working for him for 7 years. He was a great guy. He was a lot more conservative than I was, and I didn't really get, I was sort of like a conservative Democrat from Alabama who called myself a Republican at that point, frankly. And then I got here and I met, like real Republicans. So I was like, oh, wait. So my boss was kind of, I say he was kind of Tea Party before there was such a thing. He voted no on everything. He was very pure, idealistically pure, ideologically pure, and but a great guy. So I ended up working for him for 7 years. He was on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee at the time, and then he got on the Ways and Means Committee while I worked there, which is an influential committee, tax writing committee, and very important for Social Security, healthcare, taxes, trade. It's a great committee. But again, harken back, Mel is very conservative, and so he let me do the girl issues, which what happily was welfare reform. So I got to do welfare reform in 1996, which was a big landmark piece of legislation under Speaker Gingrich. So that was a fun and kind of high-profile issue I got to work on. When he retired, he was a term limits advocate and actually was one of the few who left when he said he would after 4 terms. So after I spent 7 years with him, he retired and went back to Missouri, and I ended up working, went to a law firm as a non-lawyer. I went to Aiken Gump for about 5 years, which was a great experience. It makes me seem so old, but and so Politico Pro, you're all probably pretty familiar with Politico Pro, and you get those sort of whiteboard alerts, and this is happening and that's happening. So at that time, there was an internet, but it was just in, wherever it was in a big room. It was not widely used. So there were a group of us who were not actually lobbyists, but we were sort of like reporters for our firm, and we would go to the hearings, and then if something really big happened, we would run out in the hallway. And if you've ever been in Longworth, there's this row of elevators, or a row of phone booths, or there used to be, in a part of the hallway called Gucci Gulch, where all the lobbyists would hang out. There's a really good book from 1986 called about that. And we would run out and call our colleagues at the firm and tell them that they needed to call our client and say that something was happening on our issue. And you had to actually have a friend who could give you a hard copy of the amendment or the chairman's mark. So you could take it to your office and copy it at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then take a cab back and hand it to your friend who gave it to you. So you guys have it really easy. So, PDF documents were not a thing. So, but it was a great training ground because you have to be first with the information, which is harder to do now because it's a matter of minutes rather than hours that if you're plugged into your network, you get information earlier. And then it was with the advent of PDF documents, we all in the kind of lobbying and policy world figured out that we had to add value. It's not just having the information first, but the analysis and adding value and context to the information is what's important, not just being the first to hand them a piece of paper. So I went from there. That was a great experience. Those of us who did what we did at our firm at that time did not actually lobby, so we were not lobbyists per se. We were not registered lobbyists, but it was great training for that. I did that for a number of years and loved it, but I thought, you know, I want to kind of take an issue from inception to the advocacy part. I don't want to just sort of talk to the client and tell them what they should do. I actually want to do that work for them as well. So Aiken Gump now, I think, lets non-lawyers lobby, but they did not at the time. So I decided to go elsewhere, and I went to a trade association that represents the beer wholesaling industry. And yes, the beer industry is super fun. And yeah, you know, people always say, why did you ever leave? So most of the people who worked there when I was there are still there. It was a great job. Again, that was a great training ground because you get to meet lots of members of Congress. They have a large political action committee. So, you know, you could make lots of friends. Frankly, we didn't have to ask very much of members at that point. There was not a lot of, there were like, you know, there was tax legislation impacting beer wholesalers, but for the most part, it was just sort of a very a great opportunity to build relationships on the Hill, get to know lots of members, and you didn't have to ask a lot of really hard asks of members of Congress for your employer. I went from there to the Retail Industry Leaders Association, which was great fun. That's all the sort of large format retailers like Target, Walmart, Home Depot, those guys. I enjoyed that a lot. You know, I've been very fortunate to kind of work for a lot of brands and sort of being able to walk into a room and say, I work for, you know, beer, or I work for, who doesn't love that? Or I work for, you know, large format retail. So people, I've been fortunate in many instances to work for kind of iconic brands that people really understood and could relate to, and for the most part had good feelings about. I went from there to Safeway stores, and again, that was great because even members of Congress who don't have them in their hometowns shop at a Safeway here locally and hopefully had good experiences, and if they don't, they would let us know about it and how long the line was, or they were out of their favorite product or whatever. And that was a terrific opportunity to do corporate lobbying because I had done trade association, but I'd sort of started with a law firm, 2 trade associations, then corporate. They're based in California, so I would go out from time to time, but I did not really understand being integrated into a corporate culture until I went to a large global family-owned food company where they're located here in McLean, and so I really was able to totally integrate into a corporate environment and really understand how to work within that framework when, you know, it's not just about the U.S. market and lobbying the House and Senate, but we're looking at legislative and regulatory bodies all over the world, and that was kind of humbling to realize that the U.S. is one market in the world, and not everything revolves around that place over there, which is a good thing to realize. That was a great experience, but then it was kind of time to go back to my roots, and I went back to a law firm, a different firm this time, and as a non-lawyer lobbyist, and we were called senior policy advisors at the firm, Alston and Bird, which is a terrific experience that I enjoyed thoroughly. I got to develop my own portfolio and book of business there, which was not as difficult as I thought it would be. It's still scary when I think about the fact that, you know, I'm solely responsible for identifying and bringing in business and keeping those folks happy, but, you know, so far so good. And at the firm, I was able to also work on other clients of the firm. So we would get these sort of over the transom emergency calls because a client of the firm suddenly has a legislative issue that they didn't know they had, or they've identified it, or for whatever reason, they're just figuring out that they've got an issue, and their hair's on fire and you have to help them fix it, and working with the attorneys at the firm. We were talking earlier, especially at a law firm, it's kind of nice not to be burdened with the law degree, because then you can just sort of say and do things that, you know, lawyers would not do. So I've found that I have at some points wished I had a law degree, and other times been grateful that I didn't, because I don't have to, I'm not burdened by that. So I enjoyed my time at Alston a lot. I was recruited away by a non-law firm, lobbying firm, just at the beginning of the year, and went over there in February. So I was fortunate to be able to bring my clients with me, and that's been a great fit. I've added additional clients there. It is nice not to have to bill hours. I will say that's something that I do not miss. I didn't mind it at the time, but then sort of not doing it for a while has been really, really great. So I think, you know, my sort of advice is, it's all, a lot of these opportunities have just sort of unfolded. And when I went to undergraduate, I really thought I wanted to work in international relations. The Berlin Wall fell right as I was graduating, so kind of everything I knew was obsolete and really belonged more in a history book than in a sort of current policy, and everything was new and exciting, but also different and uncertain. So when I started working on the Hill, it was really more in the vein of sort of domestic tax and those kinds of policy issues. And that's okay. I mean, I enjoy opportunities to work in the areas that I thought I would work in initially. I've had the opportunity to do, global travel with one of my employers and really get an insight into some additional ways of thinking about business and culture and things like that. And that I'm really grateful for all those opportunities. But, had I gone down the path I thought I would have, I would likely not have gotten to do that. So, I think a lot of people, younger people, are so driven, and our parents have kind of ruined you all to some extent, because we sort of push people. I'm a mom of a 20 and 17-year-old. And I think that's great, but I think there also is a lot of benefit to just sort of letting things unfold and taking opportunities and saying yes as often as you can, even if it seems like something that's not quite what you thought it would be. But, you can always change your mind and do something different. But my career has been one born of a lot of luck, I think, and some, what I lack in education, I think I make up for in tenacity and scrappiness, and just, I've been around a long time. So, but I commend you all for being here, and look forward to questions you might have and any additional insights I can add.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
Sure.
Kathleen, we'll turn things over to you.
Thanks. Well, as the other non-lawyer in the room, possibly, I'm really glad we're taking over ELI. Law and policy are so much bigger than just legal profession. I'm very excited everyone else is noticing that. So first of all, before I get started, what is Exelon besides a really hard company to spell? So all the kudos to Caitlin, who has gotten it right every time. That never happens. We're a large publicly held energy company. So we have a couple different wings. So we have 6 electric and gas utilities, including Pepco, which is providing the electricity right here in this room right now. Please don't go out. A large generation fleet. We're actually the largest clean energy generator in the country. We make more than twice as many clean electrons as everyone else. As well as we also have a large commercial and industrial group that does energy efficiency, some on-site renewables, and some electrification solutions. So we're basically an energy monstrosity. So that's just the overview of where I'm coming from currently. So I think that hits on, I think the theme that we're going to have throughout this panel is my TLDR for today is there are environmental careers everywhere doing everything. So just don't feel like, I think there used to be this idea that if you were interested in the environment, you had to either be a scientist or an advocate. and that's where it stopped, and it got siloed like that. And I think that that's, well, a shame, because the environment should be woven through everything. But also it really does kind of pigeonhole you, like, Toby thought, if you like science and this is what you should do. So I think that I'm really excited to see how broad that is becoming. And I think this panel has really gotten to that point. Myself, I went to college and I got a degree in urban and environmental planning. And you guys are very, very young, but I graduated about 6 months after September 11th. So I went to grad school where I then got a master's in environmental science and policy. And I think that is going to be a theme through my experience, is the fact that both of my degrees have an "and" in them tells you I had real trouble picking a lane. And so it was initially weird to kind of straddle this science and policy world for so long, but it really gave me a fluency to comfortably move between silos as this energy world in particular got a lot more, integrated. And as things kept changing, I was used to being kind of the odd girl out in a conversation, either knowing a lot more environment than the energy people or knowing a lot more energy than the environment people. I got comfortable in that space really early. So as these things become more integrated, I think that gave me an advantage of, not picking a lane once everything got muddled. So I think that kind of gets to the, kind of the role of dumb luck. But my first job out of college or out of grad school, after all my and degrees, I was working for an environmental consulting firm. I'm sure you work with those a lot. Writing environmental impact reports was just super boring, but we were working for a lot, just happenstance. I still thought I wanted to be essentially an environmental policy, environmental science person. But we were working for a lot of energy companies, thank goodness. And after about 2 years, my boss took me aside and was like, "You are the only person that has ever read the energy documents that come in this door. Maybe just think about that as you move forward in your career." So I think that is one thing to keep an eye out, is like, what do you like to do that nobody else does, and bring your environment sensibility to that. There were a few missteps in between there until I really thought about what she had said that there was just something about energy and everything that was very exciting in the middle 2000s, post Enron, like, oh, climate is a real thing. What is the biggest contributor? Energy is huge. Reforming energy is the most important thing you can do to actually fight climate change. So bringing that sense of excitement and taking my interest in energy company, but bringing an environment sensibility to it, of knowing that, I could do something for the climate that wasn't just working at Sierra Club. Not that those people are wonderful, but I think it's awfully limiting when you start thinking about it, of you have to work for an environmental group or an environmental science organization in order to do this kind of work. So then I was very lucky and landed a gig with an environmental policy and energy policy consulting firm running a trade group. Trade group's great experience. You learned a lot of negotiation and balancing skills. And then ended up moving in-house at one of my clients at the time, Exelon, right as climate policy was really taking off in DC the last time with the Clean Power Plan. And feel free to nerd out anytime you want in a job search. I swear to God, I got my current job just by rolling in and having read the rule that we were talking about. So it's not a traditional environmental career like I think I would have thought about it at your age, but it is, I think, one of the more environmentally minded things I could do is help reform energy. So what do I actually do at Exelon? It's the world's longest title, and it's either exactly that or it's incredibly vague. But essentially my job is to change the rules. So sometimes not having a law degree is helpful because I don't always know what the rules are to begin with, to seek value in environmental performance. So how do I help change the rules so companies like Exelon and our other energy brethren, so that the incentives are lined up with where we want the world to go? Do you incentivize dirtier technologies or do you incentivize cleaner technologies? That's all policy. Most businesses are in it for the money and for the shareholders, frankly. So how do you change the rules so that that aligns with where we want policy to go? And that's essentially my job. It's a lot of skills that I'm sure you all have. It's writing, it's presentations, it's comment letters, and it's also just straight invention. It's, inventing, what sort of incentives would cause the outcome that we want, or, as rules or laws are proposed of, bringing to the table how a corporation would react to that. I have a lot of friends in environmental groups and other kind of more traditional environmental policy world. And I think one of the things that I bring that's rather invaluable in some of those conversations is explaining exactly how the energy and electricity markets do work, and how, they will immediately pull apart that really well-intended environmental rule, and it won't have the outcome that they expect. So I think I will shorten it there because I know we have a time crunch on some things. One thing that in the instructions we wanted to identify an obstacle that I think will be more for Q&A, but I think really important thing to think about is particularly 10, 15 years ago, environment was seen as a soft skill, and it wasn't as big as science or business or law, like raw or hard stuff. But I think it's becoming more integrated in how businesses make decisions. I can't think of a Fortune 500 company that doesn't have a sustainability officer right now. But the question is do they check a box, or is it part of their actual integrated decision making? And I think there's still some ways to go on thinking of environment as a primary factor in a merger or an acquisition, not an afterthought or how expensive could that super fun site end up being. I think that we do have some ways to go across sectors on integrating environment more holistically.
Great, thank you so much, Kathleen. And we will jump ahead to Kendra and then return to Rachel.
Hello, everybody. So as you know, I'm Kendra Brown, and I'm the Chief of Staff to Congressman G.K. Butterfield. And I apologize, I was texting a little bit. We are voting today, so the members are very active. And my boss is in 2 hearings at the same time right now. He's on Energy and Commerce. So, just a little committee with a little bit of drama. So literally, some members say that 50% of the bills that come before the House of Representatives are referred to the Energy and Commerce Committee. So there's so much there, from energy and the environment to healthcare, a little thing called privacy, data protection, et cetera. So just lots of things happening right now on the Hill. So I am going to be speaking with you very briefly about roles within the government and on the just on the political side. And what I did, I just kind of mapped out the committees within the House and the Senate that touch on or have jurisdiction of the environment. And there are more than you think. So if you can see this, I'm trying to show on, this is just the House, right? The Senate starts down here and goes over on this side. And I didn't even list the Senate subcommittees. So when you think about roles within energy or the environment, there are so many roles on the Hill that any number of you all, are able to be considered for. And there are attorneys on the Hill, there are non-attorneys on the Hill. As she was saying earlier, I mean, just you name it, and they are there. So the congressional structure within the Senate and the House is that you have someone like me. I'm the Chief of Staff, so I advise the member literally on everything. So most Chiefs of Staff serve as the chief advisor to their member. Sometimes that role is held by the LD, where they act as the chief advisor, but oftentimes it is the Chief of Staff. Under the Chief of Staff, you'll have either a Deputy Chief of Staff or a Legislative Director, and then from there, you have legislative assistants, policy advisors, senior policy advisors, counsel, legislative assistants, legislative correspondents, staff assistants, communications directors, and schedulers. So every single office has some type of blend of those roles in the Senate and on the House side. Within the House, and in the Senate, there are committees, right? So every member sits on at least one committee. If it's an exclusive committee where there is jurisdiction, such as the Energy and Commerce Committee. So my boss he sat on Energy and Commerce for a long time, but then he's also now on House Admin. And so the committees that I've listed that touch on, the environment in some way, shape, or form are the Committee on Natural Resources, Agriculture, Appropriations, Energy and Commerce, Oversight and Reform, Science, Space and Technology, Transportation and Infrastructure, and the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. Those are just a few. And those are the full committees, except for the Select Committee. Some of the underlying subcommittees under Natural Resources, we have Energy and Mineral Resources, National Parks, Forests and Public Lands, Water, Oceans and Wildlife. Under Ag, you have the Biotechnology, Horticulture and Research, Livestock and Foreign Agriculture, Subcommittee on Nutrition. Under Appropriations, you have the Interior, Environment and related agencies. That's where all the funding is. Energy and Commerce, of course, there's the Energy Subcommittee and the Environment and Climate Change Subcommittee. Oversight has the Subcommittee on the Environment. Within the Senate, you have the Agriculture, Nutrition and Forestry Committee, the Appropriations Committee, Armed Services, even touches on environment, Commerce, Science and Transportation, Energy and Natural Resources, Environment and Public Works, Finance, and Foreign Relations, also Foreign Affairs on the House side. So I say all that to say there are so many opportunities for individuals within our government structure, and that's not even counting the agencies, which I know Rachel will talk about. But within Congress, within the committees also, so I've spoken about the House and Senate personal offices, but within each committee, there is a staff director. This is the minority and the majority. There's a staff director who is like the chief of staff for the committee. Then you have a chief counsel. And so what the chief counsel's role is, they are the individual who is essentially, when there is a markup and there are questions about the bills, they are the ones who sit in front of the committee and actually ask the questions of each side so that they can flesh out a piece of legislation and mark it up. It's very fascinating to watch, so I encourage you to watch that. So you have the chief counsels, you have counsels, you have subcommittees, staff directors, you have clerks, you have legislative assistants. So it's so many different roles. You have professional staff, and there are attorneys and non-attorneys, right? So the professional staff, I would say, tend to be non-attorneys, and the counsel roles tend to be the attorneys. So there really are roles for everyone. Within the committee, you really are showing an expertise in a particular area, right? So if you have expertise in nutrition and forestry, you're not going to be on the small business committee. You're just not. So you're going to go where your expertise leads you. And so that's just a little bit about how things operate within the personal offices, within the committees, and on the Senate side. So a personal office will have maybe 30 people and above. On the House side, a personal office has about 15, I would say max, maybe 15 to 18, and like individuals. And then the committee staff can range from 30 people and up to even 15 and up. It just really depends on the size of the committee. So there are just so many opportunities for individuals to really work on issues that they are passionate of. As far as where the vacancies are listed, where they are, you're always welcome to reach out to each office to see, if they're hiring. But on the House side, there's the House Vacancy Office, and that is, so they have a listing that you have to subscribe to, and all those vacancies come to you every week. On the Senate side, under the visitors page, there's an ongoing listing that is updated, I think every Tuesday, it's once a week, where they list all of the current openings, and they have the Senate Placement Office on the Senate side, and then the House side and the Senate side both have diversity offices. So Senator Schumer has a diversity initiative that he has started. There's also, I believe, a diversity initiative now that the Republican offices have started. And then on the House side, there is a diversity officer, Kimba. She's wonderful. She is housed within the House Admin Committee, but she is employed by Speaker Pelosi. So there are just lots of different things happening to diversify the environmental, well, on this side. So I speak oftentimes about diversifying the field of environmental law, but also now we are trying to ensure that we are diversifying Capitol Hill staff as well. But I think that as far as you all are concerned, within your areas of expertise, as far as, you know, the environment and energy space, there are opportunities for everyone. And I shared the structure with you just to show the amount of opportunities that do exist. And it really is based on your expertise. It's based on the opportunities. And while I do have to go back because we're going to be, you know, we're going to have votes shortly. If anybody has any questions, feel free to send me an email. So I'll leave some of my cards with you so that if any of you have any questions, if you would like to come and have coffee, if you want to just talk, I'm available to you. I probably should share just a little bit about my background. I'm supposed to do that first. So I hail from Shenandoah Valley, Winchester, Virginia. It's in the Shenandoah Valley, just a few miles past Fairfax. So I love the mountains. I'm an outdoorsy type of person. I went to Hampton University, and then I went to Howard for my Master's of Divinity, and then I went to Vermont Law School up in Vermont because, again, I like the outdoors. And then I got my LLM from George Washington. So I began working on the Hill while I was actually in school at Howard. So I started on the staff of Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and I was there in her office, became her special assistant, and then I went to law school. And when I came back, it was the summer of the BP oil accident, and so there was a lot happening. And it kind of, I learned very quickly what multi-district litigation was that summer, just really looking at, you know, where the liability stood. And after that, I went on within law school to become the national chair of the National Black Law Students Association. So I did a lot of advocacy work. And then from there, after I graduated, I went on, I came back to DC, and I came back to Congresswoman Waters' staff. And then I actually left to go to Earth Justice. So actually the office was a block away. I know they've moved now, they're a little closer to the Hill, but I was at Earth Justice as legislative counsel. Really enjoyed my time there. It was a wonderful, wonderful organization. Still love the work that they do, but I left to go back to the Hill. I got a call that there was a policy advisor opening, so I went back to be the policy director for the Congressional Black Caucus, and so I was there for 2 years in the 115th, and then I became the deputy chief of staff for a member from Philadelphia, Congressman Dwight Evans. And then, you know, I love the Hill, but sometimes you just need to get away a little bit, so I went on to be the senior director for diversity at American University Washington College of Law all of last year, and tremendously enjoyed the work there, working with students, working with individuals within the profession, and, you know, with the faculty. They have an amazing dean. Dean Camille Nelson is wonderful. So really enjoyed my time there. But I did get a call at the end of the year that Congressman Butterfield needed a chief of staff because his chief was transitioning to you know, to a company. And so I came back in December, and it has just been wonderful being back, just really helping people, you know, get placed in offices and understanding where the opportunities are, and looking at the legislation that we are able to move forward. That is what all of the members and the senators are there to do. They are there to represent their constituents and to represent them well, and we're there to pass legislation. So that's what we do every day. So that's the quick and dirty of who I am. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Kendra. Rachel?
My career story is a lot shorter because I just graduated law school in 2017. So I went to undergrad for environmental science and sociology and knew I wanted to go to law school to practice specifically environmental law. So I moved across the country to DC to go to Georgetown because I knew DC would be a great place to give me a lot of different experiences during the school year, since it's such a hub of federal agencies and nonprofits. And so basically everything I did in law school was all very environmental law focused. I was very tunnel vision. I was obsessed with the Clean Water Act, and I interned at EPA, and I knew that I really liked the role as agency attorney for an environmental and scientific agency. And so I knew that upon graduation, I was interested in entering the federal government. But I really did not know a lot about NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. NOAA is housed within the Department of Commerce. I don't know if this is a joke or if it's just my joke, but they're the agency that has the largest jurisdiction because you're dealing with, you know, the bottom of the ocean all the way up to the atmosphere with like satellite permitting and space law and all these different really interesting privacy issues that I specifically don't deal with, but that basically NOAA just has a really broad substantive areas that it works within. It is an environmental scientific agency. I was really not focused on ocean and coastal issues in law school, and I came into NOAA through the honors program. And I didn't even know the honors program existed until like 2 days before applications were due, and I happened to run into a NOAA attorney in a DOJ moot and an honors attorney, and I talked to them, and it sounded like she had a really good experience, and I looked up the job application and applied, and it's been a really good experience. So I started with NOAA in I guess it's September 2017, and the honors program is a newer government honors program. It's not as well established as like DOJ's honors program, which is huge. So I was in the 3rd class of honors attorneys, and every year they have between 1 to 4 honors attorneys. My class was 3. But it really is a neat program because you get the opportunity to rotate within NOAA General Counsel. So the way NOAA attorneys are set up is they're all housed within General Counsel, but there are many different sections, and each section deals with very different substantive areas of law, and also your role as an attorney is going to be very different in each of the sections. So you get to do 3 6-month rotations. You get to preference the sections you're most interested in. They try to match you, but it also has to do with need and you know, manager's desire. So I did my 3 rotations, and then at the end of the rotations, you get a permanent placement, and you're, you know, guaranteed a permanent placement. So it's a good experience as a new attorney to get learn about diverse roles within NOAA, but then still know that you're going to get a permanent placement at the end and not have to job search again. So my first rotation was in the enforcement section. That was a really great experience. The NOAA enforcement section deals with the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which is the fishery management statute. So like if I had a Magnuson-Stevens Act case, it would be with various types of illegal fishing, like overfishing, using illegal equipment, fishing in illegal times, like if the season's closed. You also have Endangered Species Act cases, Marine Mammal Protection Act cases, National Marine Sanctuary Act cases. And basically on my first day I arrived and got like a stack of folders, and they were like, oh great, go ahead. And you get, you have an investigating officer that puts together a file of facts, and then as an attorney, you look at it and decide, do you want to charge this person? How do you want to charge them? It's all civil cases, so you're working with civil monetary penalties, but there's a lot of judgment that goes into figuring out where you are on the scale, this penalty scale. And another great aspect about this section is that it starts in administrative court, so you're in front of an ALJ, which means that you don't actually work with the DOJ attorney until it gets appealed into trial court. So, I mean, a federal district court. And so it's a really good experience as a new attorney to work on a small, discrete case on your own and kind of learn some tough lessons and get to be lead attorney. And you send out notice of intents to sue, and you're working directly with opposing counsel. So that was a really good experience. And then my next 6 months, I was in the Oceans and Coast section, and that role was much more of an advisory role. So my client was the National Ocean Service. I worked with the National Marine Sanctuary Office, and specifically the Monterey National Marine Sanctuary, and helping them draft regulations and provide advice on different legal issues as they arose. And that was really fun because every day was really different, and it was oftentimes kind of discrete, smaller issues. You had to be much more on your feet, and I was constantly in meetings. I got to do some NEPA work and it was a really diverse work portfolio. And then my final rotation, which ended up being my permanent placement, which I was really excited about, was the natural resource section. And so in that section, you're doing natural resource damage cases, which I didn't know anything about in law school, and I really didn't know anything about until I started in the section. So in that section, you're working with CERCLA, the Oil Pollution Act, the National Marine Sanctuary Act. In law school, I'd learned about CERCLA, but I only learned about the remedial side, so the cleanup side. So that's the work that EPA and the Coast Guard do. They are like kind of the first responders, and their task is to, they have human health-based standards, basically. So they're going in and they're trying to prevent any further human health or environmental harm by removing the contaminants. And then the second phase is the restoration phase, and that's when NOAA comes in as the restoration trustee agency. And their goal is, they don't have these human health-based standards. Their goal is to basically make the ecosystem whole again. So it's much more habitat-based, and you're dealing with the natural resources that NOAA has jurisdiction over. So it's really fascinating, and NOAA is usually working on a team of other trustee agencies. So you're getting the chance to work with the Department of Interior. You're working with tribes usually there's 1 or 2 tribes on a case. You're working with state agencies, and you're all coming together as part of the trustee council to basically move this restoration case forward. And each case is really different, and getting to work with different statutes is also a great experience. So like I have one case where this yacht grounded in a sanctuary and tore up a bunch of corals. And then I have another case which is an oil spill case, and that's, just really different tempos, and you're dealing with really different players. I have a few cases that are complicated CERCLA sites where there's been ongoing hazardous contamination for years, and the EPA remedial side is they're finishing up, and then we come in and we start our assessment. And there's, I guess, 2 big phases where you first are in the injury quantification phase, where you're trying to really quantify the damage that's been done to the ecosystem, and then you translate that into restoration, where you're trying to figure out how do I, what restoration is needed to make the space whole again from this specific injury. The work is also interesting because it's a lot of like pre-litigation. Most cases settle out, and so you're dealing with a lot of negotiations instead of litigation, except I do have a couple of cases that are going barreling straight toward litigation. But it's a great space to work in because it is very interdisciplinary and it's very stimulating. So every day I'm working with scientists and restoration experts and economists, and it's the opposite of boring. Like every day is very different, and it's really neat as an attorney to have to issue spot in these different areas and work with these folks that are all really passionate and motivated, and they all have like PhDs and these crazy degrees. And so it's been a really good experience so far. Like I said, I haven't been practicing for that long, but I feel like in the short amount of time, I've gotten to see some really different roles that attorneys can play, and that's taught me that as a young attorney, I think it's really good to get these different experiences, like whether you're going through different jobs, or I somehow managed to do it in a single job. It's good because you learn what you're actually comfortable in. Like I think Toby, you said you thought you wanted to do something, but you actually didn't. It took a while to learn through your career. And that's, I felt the same way. As I didn't even know I wanted to have this role. I didn't know I would like to be, negotiating with the opposing counsel, and it's a different skill set. It's not the typical like research and writing that I had previously associated with being an attorney. It's much more talking and kind of, you're working with a big case team and kind of herding people in a way and managing, and it uses a lot of different skills. And so I guess my takeaway is that there's just, you think you're in law school. I knew I wanted to do environmental law, and I knew that I wanted to work at an agency, but even within that, I didn't know what my future would hold, and I have, I think, a really different career trajectory than I initially thought I would. That's my thought.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This was excellent. I will speak very briefly from the NGO side, and then we will jump into Q&A, and we'll start with Kendra so she can make it to her votes. As you all know, you are here at ELI, and we are a nonpartisan environmental think tank. We kind of straddle an interesting space as such. So ELI's slogan is making the law work for people, places, and the planet. And that kind of intersection is really where we work at across the board. So being a nonpartisan group is always interesting, and especially in recent years as things have become increasingly politicized, have been a really beneficial space for us to be in, because we are really viewed as and really strive to continue to be this sort of big tent convening space. You see that on our panels. We always have a range of members, of folks involved here with ELI. We are a publishing house. We publish various textbooks, the Environmental Law Forum, journals, articles, blog posts. We do a lot of research here. We do a lot of research throughout the United States, throughout the world. You know, it's a smaller staff that just does this amazing amount of work kind of all over, and it's really interesting to have all these different components work together, which I do think you tend to find at nonprofits is one person never wears just a single hat ever. For me here at ELI, that's been a really amazing experience that every day is truly different. The associates department largely runs all professional education, as well as the bulk of our membership. So on the professional education front, of course, we put on summer school. We put on 2 annual boot camps to really give people a deep, deep dive into environmental law. And the way that I really see and what my passion is based in here is how I can be of benefit to others, how I can help others learn more, what can help their work, what can further environmental work in general. I personally am not someone who loves researching only one thing for years on end. And every day it really is something new here. And it's fun to just research something just to the extent that you can bring people together and further the conversation around that. In terms of the members of ELI, that spans from corporations to those in private practice, a lot of engineering and consulting firms, a ton of other NGOs, academics, government folks. Really across the board, we try to bring people together and try to see how we can further and push environmental work in a beneficial way forward that works for people, places, and the planet. I know I kind of sound like a commercial right now. I do want to make one plug that all of our student memberships are completely free, and I would encourage you to join us. We have a lot of resources that are not only readily available to you, but that we want to be of good use to you and to others. Going back to wearing different hats, I think that there's, as you determine what's right for you, it's really important to know whether you want to take a deep, deep dive into something for weeks or months or years, or if you're someone that needs more of the constant change. In any given day here at ELI, we work on running summer school. We've started a new podcast. We have a new emerging leaders initiative for younger folks to join who are really emerging leaders in the environmental field space. And this year is ELI's 50th anniversary year, which has become a celebration of each month of a different environmental topic that we've based more programming and blog posts and publications around. So that kind of constant energy of what's going on here and the fast-paced nature of it is something that is really not unique to NGOs, but something that you do find very prevalently there. And it's also a space where you get to just be with people all the time. That's by far the best part of my work here at ELI, is being with amazing expert panelists and learning from people all the time. So I think that being said, we should jump into Q&A. We'll start with Kendra, if you don't mind. I will start us out and warm us up with a question, and then hopefully you all are inspired to follow suit. So Kendra, you have worked in academia, you have multiple degrees, NGO, you've worked on the Hill several times. How have you faced the transition through different things? What challenges were part of those transitions, when you're going from something pretty different from the next? And what were the positive parts of that as well?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think that one of the transitory takeaways is that one entity that always goes with you are the skills that you have. For me, I have always had just a heart for advocacy and for people. And I live by this motto that I always want to make a difference for as many people as I can, as often as I can. And so I think that for me, in every role, that's what I have always tried to do. Even when I was at Earth Justice, I was still involved in a number of boards where I was working with students on, their professional development. And so that naturally just has always carried me through that commitment to student achievement and to professional development. And I have always had a heart just for people and for serving people. And so I think that for me, the transition has always been about how can I be of service to those that I meet, to those who I am, a part of their life. Congressman Butterfield, we have over 750,000 people within the first, district of North Carolina. And so those are the people that we serve. Those are the individuals that we serve. And that entire area, including the environmental impacts of everything that's happening in that area, environmental justice, the birthplace of environmental justice is right in NCO1. And so there are just so many ways that, for me, the common thread has been service to others, be it students, professional development for others, ensuring that there's a pipeline of individuals who are coming onto the Hill, passing legislation that has impact on the constituencies that we represent, looking at how we can expand the base of research from the academic side to support the work that we're doing either on the Hill or in student affairs. So for me, there are common themes that exist in all the roles that I've had. So.
Great. Thank you, Kendra.
Sure.
So for our folks on the web, I do want to remind you that you can enter your questions by typing them into GoTo's question box, and don't be shy. And our colleague Hannah will come around with a microphone now for anybody who has a question for Kendra.
Blessings. I am Shara Thompson. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much. And Kendra, thank you for all that you shared, and each of you. And since we're asking you questions now, I would say that as a Black woman, there may have been some obstacles that you needed to overcome in order to establish yourself. And so while all of us here aren't Black women, some of us are, there may be certain times where we may have to overcome an obstacle, whether that be because of our age, or whether it be because of the color of our skin or because of our gender. What wisdom would you have to share with us?
Thank you for that question. Overcoming obstacles is something that is par for the course for each of us. I think that for me, I am first, the daughter of Paul and Dale Brown. So my parents, a lot came with that, right? My father was the assistant principal of our high school. So there are pros and cons to that. And so for me, so that's like first. Second, who I am as a person. And when I was growing up, I don't typically talk about this one, but I will talk about it. So I had a stutter from the time I was about 5 until I graduated from college, not high school, college. And so in addition to feeling that sometimes as a Black individual, I did not I felt that I didn't always measure up to those who were around me, because sometimes that is how the media, portrays those who look like me. There are lots of images out there that you see where you feel like that is the normative view of how people are to look. And if they don't look like this, then there's something that, is amiss or off. And so for me, I had to, one, learn how to love myself, as a Black child, as a Black woman. But then with this stutter that I had, people would actually laugh at me. They laughed at me constantly. And it was very difficult for me. And so growing up, I faced that constantly. And so for me, that really has been the number one obstacle in my life. And it's nothing like being in middle school and like the teacher would call. I felt as if the teacher called on me more. She probably didn't. But I felt that she did. And I was always in trouble because I was, when I did respond, it was typically something smart. And for me, that's how I acted out what I was feeling and what was happening to me. So that obstacle, ironically, how I overcame that when I was at Hampton University, my beloved historically Black college and university, otherwise known as HBCU.
Howard.
Okay, Howard. So out there for my master's div. Yeah, so it's this rivalry between Howard and Hampton. We can talk about that later. But when I went to Hampton, I worked at night at a telemarketing place. And so when I worked there, I had to read these screens. So it's like, why would I go to a place where I had to read constantly? But I knew that I had to overcome that challenge. And I knew that there was going to be some way, somehow, that I was going to do this. And so I would sit there and read. And I remember one night, a call came in. So it's like those ads you see on TV, right? So it's a lot of older people that sit up and watch TV. And so it was an elderly lady that called. She was the sweetest lady. And she could tell I was having problems reading the screen. And so she said, just take your time, just take your time. And she really encouraged me to learn how to pace myself. And so from that job, that summer, because I stayed there for that summer, from that job, just in that amount of time, I overcame that. But I overcame it by facing it. And so I say that to say that oftentimes we will have situations that we will have to face, just negativity, issues of, lacks of diversity, lacks of inclusion, etc. We all see what happened to Kamala this weekend, with the individual that came on the stage, where there will be times where there will be negative things happening to us, no matter where we find ourselves in life. No matter who we are, there will be negativity, but you just have to understand that you have to push through it, and that the storm only comes for you to learn how to navigate through it. And it happens for each of us. Sometimes it's figuring out if you want to take another role. I will admit that when I was leaving Earth Justice, I did not want to leave Earth Justice. It was a wonderful place to work. You should all look up Earth Justice. They're gonna love me for saying that. It was a wonderful place to work. Wonderful balance, just a wonderful staff, wonderful attorneys. I did not want to leave, but it was the time that Loretta Lynch was being confirmed as the Attorney General, and it was that fall, and so there was a lot happening, and I felt that for me, for who I was, I needed to be back on the Hill, because I needed to be in that churn of ensuring that she got to where she needed to be, ensuring that we were passing legislation and moving things forward that would help individuals that look like me. So that's why I went back to work as policy director for the Congressional Black Caucus. So there will be times in your life where you will have overcome an obstacle just to be in a place where you can help others overcome theirs. And so that's why I went back as policy advisor, policy director for the CBC. So I say that to say sometimes things that we overcome are just so that we can help others who either look like us or who have been impacted by negative legislation that has been passed that has a disparate impact on the communities. Looking at, like what the environmental assessments are, within, communities, just ensuring that those are at hand when there are companies and things that come into communities. And so I think that that's also one huge way that we can just have an impact on our communities, because I'm all about living a life of impact. That's who I am. That's why I'm here. And so that's a little bit of how I overcome.
Kendra, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing that. Definitely a great lesson in facing adversity, and thank you for that question. Do we have any other questions for Kendra before she has to depart? Okay, thank you so much. We will now open things up for questions for the rest of our fantastic panel. Do we have any questions on the web we want to start with?
Yes, actually we have one for Rachel and Toby in regards to how did you know law school was right for you, and how did you know that you were ready to apply and attend law school?
Do you want to go first?
Well, I'm gonna be franker than I probably should be. I just kind of went to law school. I think my mom told me like I should be a lawyer because I argue with her really well. So, you know, I think one of the themes of my presentation is that I didn't really have this environmental career well plotted out. I think I went to law school with the intention of eventually working in a field with the intersection of law and science and help formulate policy with the understanding of both. And that's not how things, turned out. If anything, I think I suffered from a bit of a lemming mentality of just sort of like going along, and I would encourage everyone else to just sort of be a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit more intentional and taking more advantages of the opportunities that present themselves, so that you don't have to, spend 8 years trying different things and figuring out things on the fly.
I think I was the opposite. I thought I wanted to go to law school as an undergrad, but I decided that it would be best to take some time off and think about it and think about other options. I knew I wanted to work within the environmental world. And I knew I didn't want to go like hard science route, but I was having a hard time choosing between like environmental policy versus going to law school. And in the end, I figured that law school kind of gave me more options of the directions I could take, and that it would be a worthwhile investment because of that. A lot of people go to law school and then go directly into policy, or a lot of people go into urban planning. There just was so many more opportunities. I thought they would come with law school instead of going to get a master's in something that was very specific. And so after taking some time, I decided, that would probably be the best choice for me. And there's a lot of anxiety that comes with the decision because most schools are really, really expensive. And unless you're, are very lucky, it's a lot of debt. But I will say that there are quite a few law schools that have programs for people that know they want to do public interest law. Like Georgetown has the LRAP program, where if you're working in at a nonprofit or an agency, it doesn't have to be federal, it can be state, they will give you money to make your loan payments for you until you make a certain amount of money, and then it slowly goes down. It's like a scale, basically. And knowing opportunities like that, I think, is really important before you go into law school, because it is a huge financial responsibility. But I knew that since I wanted to do public interest law, as long as I was able to get a job, I went to a school that would help me financially do that after I graduate. And then I'm also in the federal loan forgiveness program. So after 10 years, my loans will be forgiven. So just kind of doing that kind of research beforehand, I think, helps make the decision. I think in the end, I'm really happy I went to law school, and I think that I didn't love law school. I think some people actually genuinely really do, and I found it kind of a hard environment to be in. Like cold calling is not great. But then as you get past your first year and you're able to do stuff that you're more interested in, like clinic and internships, and you find your group of friends, everyone has different experiences, but it's not like all 3 years is absolutely horrible. If it's something that that is you are interested in, you think about the financial side of it, I think that it can be a really good, worthwhile decision. And it's given me a lot of different opportunities and career paths that I could potentially go down.
Yeah, weirdly, I'll actually comment on the question. And I think I've been in and around lawyers for most of my career. And I think that, well, to the extent that you can ever know what you want to do at 22, unless you're Rachel.
I did. That's why I had to go to law school. I couldn't be too.
But I think the only thing that I've ever found has been closed off to me by not having a law degree is technically being a lawyer. I will never be general counsel. And I generally have, any legal briefs I write are, reviewed by a lawyer, and that's good for everyone involved. But I think that kind of those technical, like if you, like Toby's friend, if you know you want to be a litigator, you probably have to go to law school. If you're just generally interested in policy, try it out for a while. Like go work on the Hill, go, intern at Earth Justice apparently. But I think that that's one thing that, for better or for worse, was missold to a lot of people of Toby's in my generation, is that to do policy and to be in the world of making law, you had to go to law school. And I just didn't have the money, but it turns out that's not true.
Thank you all. Do we have questions in the room?
So this question is for Toby and Kathleen. When you're working with clients or coworkers that have corporate or business backgrounds that may not have historically considered the environment as their primary, as they're making decisions, what advice do you have on how to encourage those people to consider either environmental risks, what you do, or environmental incentives?
The short answer is put it in money. I mean, I obviously work with a lot of people who, would know if a tree if you smacked them with it. But I think being able to, and that's it took me a while to learn to speak it, but like changing how I would say, we should have EPA should have a rule that regulates carbon because the sky just doesn't resonate with everyone, but saying, EPA should have a strong rule that regulates carbon because we'll make a lot of money does catch the kind of the business, the investment, like those types of people's attention, and just learning how to take, learning how to read your audience and put it in terms that, matter, not that, money's all that matters, but in the corporate world, if you can't put it in dollar form, it doesn't matter. So saying that like future generations and the atmosphere and everything, does resonate with some people, but a lot of other people, you have to put it into, earnings per share, which I've learned to speak. That's been very hard. Don't discount the value of an MBA. But just essentially being able to figure out what their metrics are and put it in them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think your ability to read the room and understand who your audience is and what their motivations are is very important. It doesn't matter if you think if something is important, it matters if they think it's important. So one thing that I'll say is that, like, obviously on a very environmentally intensive deal, on a manufacturing target that uses a lot of hazardous chemicals in its processes, then the environmental specialists are going to be very front and center, and they're going to be on a lot of calls and negotiations and a lot of direct contact with the client. Our firm is also really good at staffing us on the deals that don't appear to be that environmentally intensive, for the most part, because sometimes you don't expect there to be an issue, but sometimes there can be an issue. So, for example, I had a deal where it was a software company and just administrative operations and leased office space. And, you wouldn't think that there's any environmental hair on that one, but it turned out that their headquarters was a former manufacturing facility that had been redeveloped into office space. And so, we're there to kick the tires. And when you go into that kind of exercise, you cannot bring your normal huge litany of all these environmental questions that you would ask, because either your client or even your own deal team are going to kind of get frustrated with you and say this is not the appropriate approach. But so you scale back, you keep it very focused, you're kicking the tires, and you're asking just as many questions as you need to in order to confirm that they're aren't any surprises. So I think, you know, it's very important to sort of tailor your approach. One other example I'll give is ESG. ESG is becoming a very hot topic these days, and you know, for the most part, our clients care about it. It's a growing movement, but it all sort of started where you have these the private equity funds care about it primarily because they have investors who care about it, and the investors will say, what are you doing in terms of evaluating ESG of the businesses, and what are you doing to improve it? So it's been largely, again, kind of like, you know, money talks, really. And so yeah, that's an adage that proves true.
So Shannon, you've had a lot of experience with, you know, a huge variety of corporations. What would you add to this?
I had the pleasure of going from a large publicly traded company to a much larger private company. And that company was able to really put their money where their mouth is and do a lot of very aggressive, sustainable practices, and really not have to worry about the bottom line, which I think helped me understand both what a great opportunity that was for that company, but also what a challenge it is for publicly traded. So in everything that company did, they really put, you know, you talked about the motto of ELI being people, places, and planet, and theirs was a similar phrase, and they really did that. But they also didn't have to worry about that the shareholders are 3 people. So it was a quick conversation about what's the right thing to do. Let's go do that. And, you know, bottom line be damned, we're going to be here in 50 years and we can take the hit, and we don't have to worry about it. But it really helped instruct for me what a challenge it can be for publicly traded companies to do the right thing on anything. I mean, yeah, you know what the right thing is to do, but you've got quarterly earnings and people, you know, yelling at you because you didn't make your numbers. Like, yeah, but we're trying to, you know, have healthier customers or do better things for the environment. And it's such a short, it's just a really striking difference between a very, very long view of, you know, 50 and 100 years to the next quarter. Mm-hmm. It was an interesting time.
And then when you were with the group that was also very internationally based, did you see a big difference between kind of your experiences that were more domestic and a more international approach?
The company had a very global approach overall, and I did not really have line of sight into how the company dealt with specific policies in other countries because, again, because we were global and we were private, we could really do things in a way that a lot of companies couldn't. So I can't really speak to dealing directly with other countries.
Great, thanks. Sure. Do we have more questions in the room?
I have a question.
Sure.
Should I just go ahead?
So this will amplify it for our webinar folks.
Thank you. Well, my question is directed to Rachel, and I want to begin with an expression of gratitude because Noah funded my doctoral dissertation work, which was a political ecological analysis of disaster-induced displacement in a number of sites, all of them in Latin America. So it was an international grant competition. I'm an environmental anthropologist, and I also have a law degree from the UK, so I can't practice law in the US, which brings me to my question. All of you have focused exclusively on domestic opportunities, and I'm wondering if anybody has any suggestions for those of us who might be interested in opportunities that are more internationally oriented. Is Noah doing something in that respect? I mean, I know that some of the programs are focused outside of the US, so any suggestions?
Sure, so I can actually speak on that a bit. I also received my graduate degree. I went to graduate school in the UK. And I think that I chose that path pretty specifically because I felt that I could return to the US and be here at ELI and learn so much on the domestic front across the board. And I chose that opportunity pretty intentionally in wanting to receive a broader, more global education on what else is going on in the world in the environmental space. I think that, of course, there's ways to educate ourselves and to work on that space from here within the United States, and especially here in DC. Of course, there's so many NGOs with international presences that are also based here. There's, UNEP and World Bank and, so many different presences that we're really fortunate largely have such a big presence here. So I think that anything you want to do, you can do with varying degrees of success in the US versus internationally, and being able to find areas that overlap and that Venn diagram in between is, I think, something unique to, not completely unique to DC, but is definitely a bit easier here.
Yeah, one thing not quite unique to DC, but better in DC is I feel like our company is very weird in that we're the size energy company we are, and our footprint is mostly domestic. So, I think there's also a lot of multinational corporations that are frankly ahead of where US domestic companies are on these issues. And it's like the national grids of the world that are dragging US companies forward on a lot of these issues. So I think, international companies that have a footprint in DC are another opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely an international component to the work that we do. Our clients are looking at both domestic and international businesses. So the businesses and the facilities that we look at are in all different kinds of countries. When we work with environmental consultants, we're working with international environmental consultants that have usually local auditors in just about every jurisdiction. And there's also often like a network of foreign counsel. So we will be handling mostly the US issues, but then if we've got other operations in other jurisdictions, we'll have a network of law firms from other countries who are also available, and we'll try to look at the big picture. But if there's a specific question in that particular foreign jurisdiction, obviously we're going to try to leverage the expertise of that local law firm to try to get an answer to that question.
Great. Do we have another question in the room? Let's start.
Hi, my name is Sandra Coates. First of all, Rachel, thank you. I am actually a Sea Grant Fellow this year, legislative, so thanks to Noah. But my question is for you, Shannon. I am from Alabama.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I'm at the University of Alabama about to get my doctorate, defend the summer environmental engineering. And my question, I'm not sure about a law degree because of the expenses and everything. I want to know what skills do you attribute to your success so far as a lobbyist? I know you're a non-lawyer, and I'm tired of school.
Take a break. Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm going to go to law school, but I am interested in, the environment and helping, like Toby and stuff like that. But
first, let's have lunch. Yeah. Okay, of course. So I attribute it to just not being a jerk. And I used to remember everybody I met a lot better than I do today. But, Kendra was talking about the different people in the office. So from the staff assistant that you meet, and you're a legislative fellow now. So you're
for actually City High School.
Okay. Yeah. So you're making lots of friends. So it's from everybody from the staff assistant to the scheduler to the LC to whatever. You never know where they're going to be. You never know where you're going to be. Just trying to meet as many people as possible and be a straight shooter. I always try to tell people, here's my position, here's my client's position, here's what you'll hear from the other side, here's why I think we're right. Try to be as transparent and open and honest and friendly and nice and accommodating and not annoying as possible. And it works pretty well. So, and I really I like what I do. And I still think that most members of Congress are here for the right reason. And I'm not particularly partisan. I happen to be of one party, but I've had some of the best success of my career working with members of the other party. So, I'm kind of post-partisan. Like my party, when I worked at Safeway, I used to say my party is Safeway. Like people who like me, that's who I'm for. And that really, the policy issues cut across party lines. So that's seldom we find a issue that you're lobbying that's purely partisan. It's usually geographic or has to do with some other issue. I think that's, just kind of longevity and sticking it out and hanging around is a good thing to do. Sure.
Great. I think we have time for 2 more questions in the room and 1 more from our webinar folks. I think we have very precise.
Hi. So I think that some of you guys said that the general trend is that if you want to do environmental work, you don't necessarily have to go to an environmentally focused organization. There's private practices that care about the environment. But say so I'm me fresh out of college with my degree in biology and wanting to save the whales and stuff, right? How do I break into that field which is so alien to me of private businesses and stuff to actually do meaningful environmental work?
Well, who wants to start? You all do meaningful environmental work.
I think some of it is just you can't get exhausted. It's, for better or for worse, environment is often a popular field, so you're going to send out a lot more resumes than it feels like you should. But I think, trying out a lot of different things, especially a biology degree, God, you can do anything with that. And just, I'm definitely, my parents are going to love that I was on this panel because my career path did not look like a line, looked more like a ball of yarn at the beginning. But just figure out, as Toby also figured out, learning what you don't want to do is really important too. So sometimes you got to just start trying it. And it sucks when you first graduate college, it really does, because everybody wants 2 years of experience. But how do you get 2 years of experience if no one will hire you because you don't have 2 years of experience? It's a real feeling, you're not wrong. So the Hill is a really good place to start to get a little bit of everything. If you can get in there young, they don't pay well. But I think just try it. You'll find something you like and something that you don't, and just keep following, those choose your own adventure books, keep following the thread of the things you like or hopefully are also good at.
I would add that everyone, for the most part, that you meet who's doing any sort of environmental work is passionate about the environment in some way or another. And if you can really let that fuel you and inspire you and be tenacious, as Shannon was saying, about finding opportunities and being honest and kind, then those characteristics will, when you pair them with your interests and are open to opportunities, will lead you very far.
It's great you're going to events like this where you get to learn about all these different, job opportunities you didn't know existed. I think that was really helpful to me right after I graduated, was just talking to a lot of different people that had different careers that were kind of tangibly related to what I was passionate about. And as you talk to more people, you see that there's more space than you realize there is, because you only know about like I knew about Earth justice, but I didn't know about any of the work that any of you folks did when I was in law school even probably. So I would say that I think the best thing you could do is just to continue to talk to people and learn more about just different experiences too, because I think sometimes when you graduate, you're like, oh, well, now I should get a master's or a law degree or just get more education, because especially now, like when I graduated, I had to have an unpaid internship and work at a bakery on the side in order to get any experience in anything I was interested in. It was really, really hard. And so I think everyone around me was like, well, screw it, let's defer this pain and just go to more education, which I don't know is necessarily always the best thing to do because you're not focused. It's hard continuing to go to school, it's expensive. So I think the best thing you can do is just really take the time to talk to people.
Yeah, I didn't think this graduating law school, but I think it now. I think networking is super important. I think one of the traps that I fell into was just try to be just very achievement focused, go to the best school you can get to, take the best job that you can. But I think as we've talked about the tremendous variety of careers in the environmental field, there's no one best job. There's the best job for you. And the problem or issue with law school is that I think law school does a great job of teaching you how to think about the law, and I'm extremely grateful that I went to law school because I feel like I got that sense for like law being like this invisible structure that was not really readily apparent to everyone. So I'm grateful for that, but I didn't feel like I learned anything about what it meant to actually be a practicing lawyer and what all these different jobs are and what would I like about this one and what would I not like about that one. So I think the more that you can network, the more that you can actually talk to people and find out a more detailed, concrete sense of what it is to do that job and what they like about it and what they don't like about it. I think that will help you find the right thing for you.
Do we have any more questions on the web?
Yes, we have one more, and I believe it's directed to Kathleen. What is your experience with environmental consulting and your background and how you kind of broke into that realm?
On the point of networking, I broke into that realm because one of my classmates in grad school knew that her old firm had a job opening and put in a good word for me. That's really how it initially happened. And to make it also networking and light stalking. My last job in the consulting firm I worked for before this, it's very small. It's one of those niche worlds where in energy and environment, everybody knows this company. Step 1 foot outside of there, nobody knows this company. But I found out who they were because I was living in Boston at the time and had met a really interesting woman that had just been appointed to the PUC there and was curious how she got to there in life and went through her bio and saw a company name I didn't recognize and Googled them and they had a job opening. And I got it. And that's how I met all the people at Exelon and made that move, which is definitely not something they ever teach you at the Career Center to, stalk people. But in some ways it is of like looking at someone that you think that is either doing something interesting now or is somewhere you would want to be, either ask them how they got there or the internet's awesome.
Well, thank you so much to our participants for joining us today here in person and on the web and for your thoughtful questions. We do hope that you will continue to think about the many opportunities and facets of careers in the environmental sector. We're grateful for your participation in ELI's annual summer school series, and we hope to welcome you all back next week for NEPA, ESA, and the fundamentals of environmental law. I want to extend a huge thank you to our fantastic panel. Toby, Rachel, Kathleen, and Shannon, you all contributed so much, and thank you very much for lending your leadership to summer school. Thank you all again. Oh yeah, I'm sure. Okay.
Do you like cards?
Pardon?
Do you like cards?
Do I like cards? Like, cards?
Yeah. Because you're like.
Oh yeah. No, I really don't. I'm an early child, so I don't know how to read it for me. Well, yeah, but I just on the internet.
I don't have a good.
No, I just randomly like
I just got that. All of a sudden noticing.
I know. Cards printed up. Yeah, I don't know how to do that. I should say actually cards.